Hello and welcome to another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop. This time round we're looking at another jewel in the crown of this business, and that is this car. It's an Aston Martin DB4 Series 4 stroke Series 5. Confused? All will be revealed. This particular car has an interesting story. A customer of ours for 20 years or so, nigh on 20 years, called me one day. We did some work on I did a full restoration on a Ferrari for him. And he called me out of the blue and said, I'd like you to go and have a look at an Aston Martin. And I said, okay, where is it? And he said, it's Oxford. So I got myself to Oxford Airport, where I was met by a charming gentleman with a flat cap and a pair of string back driving gloves, driving this car, which at the time was presentable and functional, but certainly not Concours. And he was a very charming man. He met me there, and he was the vendor of this car, the owner, which at the time was British Racing Green. And but the funny thing is, my customer, before I went to see the car, he said to me, if these three things are in place, two or three things, please don't, if there's any danger of putting the deal in jeopardy, please don't negotiate. Just pay the full asking price. And that puts me in an interesting position. But I did just that. I had a look at the paperwork, and it turned out that the car belonged to a certain individual in the north of England. And the car started life, not in British Racing Green, but in this colour, which is a beautiful original ICI paint. ICI made the paint for Aston Martin and Rolls-Royce in the 1960s and beyond. And it's called Caribbean Pearl. And it is an utterly stunning shade of blue metallic. So this is what the car started life in. I checked on the build sheet, I checked the specification, and I said to him, well, I have been instructed to buy the car. And he sort of, really? I said, yes. Would you take £5,000 less? And he said, yes. So the deal was struck, and I did say to my customer, look, I did negotiate £5,000 off because I thought I had to do something, and he said, fine. The money changed hands, and the car became his. And the story behind it is something in his mind triggered when he saw this car for sale, even though it was in British Racing Green, and that was the fact that, according to the conditions in the car's history, which I confirmed, his uncle owned this car and he used to drive him to school in it as a kid. Isn't that lovely? So we confirmed it was the car. That was why this particular DB4 was bought. And we then entered upon a full restoration of the car. And this car was finished, I think, about 6-7 years ago now, something like that. It's come in for a service. It did have a full restoration. Before I delve into the Aston Martin history side of things, I will just say a little bit about the car. The bodywork is, it was designed and engineered by Touring of Milan for the car's launch in 1958. It is the Superleggera construction, patented by Touring of Milan, and this is all hand-formed aluminium panel work over a wooden buck, literally hand-formed out of the sheet. I mean, stunning work. And the car, it was determined that most of the aluminium bodywork was okay. So was the very lightweight steel frame underneath, which supports it, hence Superleggera, super light. And the aluminium body is sort of laid over this small steel frame. And what Tony at Moorland Classic Cars, who did the body restoration on the car, he knows Astons very well, we concluded that the front end was beyond repair, just with the ravages of aluminium paintwork, having stones thrown up at it over the last 50 years as it was, and accident damage, one thing and another, just general wear and tear. So a slice was taken here with a slitting disc. This is normal Aston Martin high-level repairs, and a front end was made up on the wooden buck, and then it was offered up to the rest of the body, and as they say in all the best clothing circles, you can't see the join. In fact, you can just feel the join under here. There is a tiny, tiny, tiny ridge, and that's where the front aluminium section was welded on to the rest of the car. As is normal with these, the sills were absolutely rotten. So again, the aluminium bodywork is cut away here. It's all exposed. And then new sills and floors were actually made up for the car, etc. I mean, mammoth restoration job, but that's what they need, because they weren't intended to last 50 years. Aston Martin didn't build them that way. Nobody built cars to last 50 years. Probably the closest was Rolls-Royce and Bentley. We did a whole restoration job on the car, every last thing. We managed to preserve the original beautiful Connolly leather interior. This is the original interior from 1963. And we have the fortunate position of having some fantastic ex-Connolly craftsmen at our disposal to do this work, and they've retreated the original oxblood leather, and it's come back to life beautifully. We've tailor-made some Wilton carpets for it, which just complement the package. New headlining, lots of new interior work, but that's what the owner wanted. He didn't want a better than new car. He wanted something that could turn up at a concours and stand a very good chance of getting some points, but he didn't want it so good that he couldn't drive it. It did start life as a standard DB4 without the sort of high performance engine package, but he did say to me, I want this car to go. So that's what we did. We actually prepared the engine. We did a bit of a tune-up job on the engine, to put it in very basic terms. The engine started life as the 3.7 litre with two very small SU carburettors on it. It was limited to 240 brake horsepower, 220, 240, which for a 3.7 litre engine was quite respectable in the early 1960s, late 50s for that matter. The funny thing is, because it was a standard engine, fairly low stressed, when we stripped the engine down to its bare aluminium block, the block was found to be in quite good condition. And the thing about 1950s and 60s engines is the actual block, I mentioned this in the last video about Lamborghini Countach, the material actually metallurgically moves slightly as it heats up and cools down. Aluminium has a higher coefficient of expansion than steel, for example, or iron, so it expands and contracts more. It just all moves a bit. And the funny thing is, the level of corrosion and wear and tear inside the engine block is directly proportional to how highly tuned the engine was when it left the factory. Because the more stress the engine was put under, the more things are likely to degrade. Although the block was basically very good, because it wasn't a highly tuned one, we did have to do some aluminium welding and some rejuvenation of the original cylinder block. So this engine still has the original block. It's been taken out to 4.2 litres. We fitted triple Weber carburetors, ported the heads, all the usual things. And this creates a very, very nice, sweet, fast car. The interesting thing is, it's got the DB4 type headlights, the non-exposed headlights. And this was one of the last cars that Aston Martin built with this configuration, because most of them by now were becoming the DB4 Mark V and late Mark IV with what's called a Vantage front end, which had the faired-in headlights that we have become accustomed to, really. So this was quite an unusual car to be so late in production with the non-faired-in lights. And of course, in any video about Aston Martin's DB4s and 5s, I have to mention James Bond and the Goldfinger film. Although it was advertised as a DB5, the car that Sean Connery actually drove in Goldfinger was not an Aston Martin DB5. It was an Aston Martin DB4 Series 5. So it was the last of the DB4 range, which was made to look like a DB5. It had DB5 badges on it, some details. And the reason for this was because while filming was going on, Aston Martin were preparing the DB5 for launch. So So that they thought, why not take this PR advantage when they eventually woke up to the fact that this could be a PR opportunity, which car manufacturers in the 60s weren't really on that page, product placement. They said, yes, okay, we've got the DB5 coming out in a few months. We'll give Iain Productions a DB4 Mark V disguised as a DB5, and obviously the DB5 will be launched to massive fanfare because it's a movie star, and the rest is history. This is essentially on its way towards being an Aston Martin DB5. The lines are very thin indeed. The same thing happened with the Persuaders with Roger Moore. He had a Bahama yellow Aston Martin DBS, and the DBS V8 was coming out in a few months after he got given the Aston Martin. So Aston Martin put the lower front valance and the alloy wheels and the badging of the DBS V8 on a 6-cylinder DBS because the V8 was about to be launched. Why not? Why give the movie company or the production company last year's model? This is a very, very sentimental value again to me, this car. We poured a lot of love and resources into this car at the time. It still goes like a train. Yeah, so we're going to just have a look around this. We're going to tune it and service it and take it for a run. Well, Pete, it didn't tax your automotive electrical skills too much, this one, really, did it? It was either,
well, it was quite an obvious one when we got down to it, yeah.
Yeah, it was either the control box, the voltage regulator, or the dynamo. And the reason why we didn't fit an alternator, because you can get alternators built into these now, can't you? Is because, really, this car is never going to be used in driving rain, demisting windows at night with lights on, fans on, etc. So the electrical load is not. If this is working properly, it's perfectly up to
it'd be perfectly adequate. Yeah.
And the main difference between a dynamo and an alternator is because of the way the alternator is, and I can't believe I'm saying this in front of Pete, but never mind. He's waiting to see how I trip myself up now. Is an alternator carries on charging when the engine is idling, whereas a dynamo tends to stop charging. So that's why in the old days, in the 1960s, etc., if cars were used every day, they could suffer from low battery voltage because they were driving through town with hardly any revs and lots of electrical load. Whereas the alternator provides it all the time. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Putting words in your mouth drastically here. Okay, so, yeah.
So the customer complained of it intermittently not charging.
Yep.
And he said he'd noticed if he went over a bump or something, it would either go off charge or back on. So straight away we thought, loose connection or something, somewhere, you know. But because the car was in the Isle of Man and we weren't, you know, it was hard to just diagnose over the phone. So here it is. So I just did a quick check on the dynamo. So I knew there was a fault in the dynamo. Took it off, took the cover band off, and straight away we just saw this. The tail off one of the brushes was just hanging there, just hanging onto the brush. Right. As soon as I touched it, it just fell away.
Right.
So it's just broken off, that's all there is to it. So a new brush and polish the commutator, and it'll be like a new one.
Absolutely. Not a new broom, a new brush. Sorry, we'll edit that bit out. And this is sort of like an electric motor in reverse, isn't it?
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
So instead of driving the shaft, it's actually relying on the shaft to provide electrical the spinning of the shaft. Yeah. And these are the little carbon brushes here. They're tiny little, almost like a bit of a slate carbon brush, which is spring-loaded onto the commutator, and as it revolves, it sends. And this is, what is it, 35 amps, something like that? Probably.
Don't know without looking at the number. Yeah, it'd be about that, yeah.
Which is actually fairly reasonable.
Well, as you said, it's perfectly adequate for that car, you know.
Yes, and it's no less reliable than an alternator, really, is it?
No, not really. They don't last as long as an alternator.
Right.
I mean, technically, the main difference is they're back to front in that on this, the field coils are on the outside and the charging current comes through the brushes.
Yes.
So you could be talking, 30 amps up max output coming through the brushes and the com. An alternator is the other way around. The field is on the inside in the rotor, and the brush is onto the slip ring, so you're only talking a couple of amps there. And the output is in the stator on the outside,
Yes.
so no moving parts.
Right.
So technically that's the biggest difference. All the current on these goes through the brush
Right.
gear, and on the alternator it doesn't. You know,
Right.
it's just the field current that goes through it.
Yeah. And in
But
fact,
these don't last as long.
no, understood. And the likes of Dyson, I think, have brought out brushless motor technology now as well.
So believe, yeah.
We won't delve into how that works, but it obviously does without these in some way or other. But Pete, that's great. We'll send that off, get a new brush fitted, and it should be good as new.
Should be an easy fix. Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for humouring me with my explanations of electrics. You're a good
No
sport.
problem.
Well, as I keep thinking and saying, any link with James Bond is very hackneyed and cliched, really. But the fact remains, the car will be inextricably linked to James Bond forever. And yes, the beauty of this car is that it survived not one, but 8 Bond films, actually. And these references keep coming up. Valtha PPK. Well, anyway, what I was thinking was that we should really just concentrate on forget all this silliness. We should concentrate on the actual driving of the car and the technical aspects, and yeah, therefore we should take it for a run. This may not be the most frenetic car of its era, but in fact when this car was made in 1963, the frenetic era hadn't really started with the wild Lamborghinis and other such concoctions, but the brief, as I said earlier, was our customer wanted it to go, quote unquote, and it does. Now that it's lovely to see the voltmeter, the right side, the ammeter rather, the right side of the zero mark. In other words, charging the battery as opposed to discharging it. And it's lovely to see everything behaving as it should do. Oil pressure, even when warm, about 80 psi at 1500 RPM. They have very high oil pressure, these engines. The two outstanding engines of this era for high oil pressure are this and the Lamborghini V12. And they both operate at well north of £100 per square inch in old money when they're cold. Even when they're warm, they can go above that. Just due to bearing clearances and other such things. But this is it's always a treat to drive these cars. As I say, they're more a car that was made for crossing continents rather than actually sort of racing, although they did race the DB4 GT. I had the pleasure of tuning one of the 70 original cars, still in fabulous condition. It got pulled out of exhibition specially for me to tune it at the amazing Frank Shook Museum in South Africa. They actually did that specially for my visit and invited me to do it. It was all arranged, and that was lovely. But this car is very close to that. It doesn't have the twin spark plug head that the GTs do have, but it's still got plenty of grunt. 4.2 litre, of course. These engines are stretchable now, and to larger capacities, originally 3.7, and we did manage to salvage the original cylinder block. and it's getting nicely warmed up now. So I think we can just open the taps and see what this car performs like and sounds like. So we'll just get it on the straight. I'm not particularly inclined to drive this car on its door handles. It's not the point of the exercise, but let's see what some of the point of the exercise is. Here we go. Wow. Amazing. What a lovely machine this is. Just loads of mid-range grunt. Fantastic. And stopping power to match, actually. As the DB4 evolved, they upped the ante with the braking system. Of course, we are talking 60-year-old technology now, but the DB5 was a step up again. It was one of the main differences, electric windows, few bits and pieces, between the DB4 Series 5 and the DB5 was the braking system. But even so, this is still very good. It's not a fantastically heavy car, but it just loves to go. It's got huge, just sort of depths, this engine. It's just lovely. We'll just get it on the straight again. We might just try punting it round a few bends as well, just because we can. Yeah, fantastic. To extend the car a little more, I am going to take it for a bit of a blast through these curves, actually, because it does handle as well as go. It really does. This beautiful, precise rack and pinion steering. Just lovely. The car is beautifully balanced. And it is fast. This car is still a fast car. The gearbox is actually an interesting synergy between agricultural machinery and exotic cars. Not the first company to do that, of course, and not the last either. But this is a David Brown gearbox. DB, of course, named after David Brown, who owned Aston Martin for a number of years, and his tractor manufacturing company actually had a gearbox subdivision, and they made the gearbox for this car. The later ones went on to the ZF 5-speed gearbox, which was very expensive, but this one has the most beautiful shift action. There we go, and it's very slick. As I change, we need to line up that gear lever knob from second to third. Lovely, lovely, positive action. Yeah, the David Brown gearbox, and it also has the Laycock de Normanville overdrive built into it, which just with the flick of a switch you find an extra gear, which is wonderful, actually. It's much easier and much more pleasant to do that than to change into fifth gear. Just literally flick an electric switch and that's it. You have your fifth gear. So we'll just open it up. into fourth, overdrive on, and that is doing 1800 RPM at 60 miles an hour, which is very, very high geared for a 1960s car. Off again, super, super easy. Yeah. Well, our brief was you wanted this car to go as well as it looks, and it certainly does. It's a delight. However, I do have a bit of a special mission. I'm just a bit pushed for time. I do have somewhere I need to be because my Earl Grey tea and bacon butty, bacon sandwich is waiting for me. One other beautiful aspect of this car is the pedal position. It just invites you to heel and toe. So in other words, put your foot on the brake pedal and then just blip the throttle while braking, straight down into second or whatever, and then away. It's just the perfect positioning for heeling and towing, as it's called, with your right foot. I'll just do that again. In fact, let's go into fourth. And we'll heel and tow down into second. So, dabbing the brakes, rev the engine with my edge of my right foot, push the clutch down, and there we have it. I'll do that once more. And again. In fourth, heel and toe, double D clutch. There we go. A very rewarding car to drive this. Because the handling is so sublime, you can balance the car on a knife edge on bends like that. It's just delicious, actually. Well, that concludes another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop. Hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for joining us, and please like and please subscribe. We'll be back with something else very soon.